At 0847 local time, a Russian long-range aviation package entered the Norwegian Sea region. 4 nuclear-capable bombers flew in tight formation, supported by 2 escort fighters. From the perspective of the crews on board, the mission was unremarkable. Navigation systems were stable. Fuel state was normal. Communications were routine. Another scheduled patrol along a familiar route. There was no indication at that moment that the operational balance had already shifted. 4 minutes later, at 0851, a scramble order was issued from Erland Air Station. By 0855, 2 Norwegian F-35s assigned to 332 Squadron were airborne, accelerating north through layered cloud and climbing rapidly into thinner Arctic air. Their assigned intercept geometry placed them roughly 380 kilometers northeast of their departure point. But this intercept would not follow the usual pattern. Rather than closing directly on the bomber formation, the Norwegian fighters turned away from the threat axis. They initially flew south, then west, carving a wide arc over open ocean before gradually bending back toward the northeast. This routing extended intercept time by approximately 12 minutes. Those 12 minutes were not a delay. They were an investment. A head-on intercept compresses time. Closure rates exceed 700 knots, leaving crews with seconds to visually identify targets and decide how to proceed. A stern intercept reduces closure speed to roughly 400 knots, expanding those seconds into minutes. More importantly, it reshapes the geometry of the encounter. The bomber's primary surveillance radar is optimized for forward coverage, projecting energy into a wide cone ahead of the aircraft. Approaching from directly behind places an aircraft inside a region the radar cannot observe without physically maneuvering the entire airframe. And heavy bombers do not maneuver quickly. By positioning high and aft, the Norwegian pilots established what fighter crews refer to as a perch. Altitude becomes stored energy. If the bombers descended, the fighters could convert height into speed. If the bombers climbed, they would bleed performance. If they attempted to accelerate, the fighters retained the fuel margin to remain matched. Every potential response narrowed available options. Inside the bomber cockpits, threat warning receivers remained silent. Radar sweeps returned no contacts. Instrumentation indicated uncontested airspace. Crew attention drifted back toward routine tasks, fuel checks, navigation updates, time on station calculations. The aircraft continued on course. The instruments were incorrect. At 0903, the F-35s reached their intercept position, approximately 80 kilometers behind the formation and 3,000 meters above it. They remained completely undetected. The Norwegian pilots had not activated their fire control radars. They did not need to. Through helmet-mounted displays, both pilots could already observe the bomber formation using passive sensors alone. Infrared signatures from 8 turboprop exhausts burned brightly against the cold background of the upper atmosphere. Fire control systems quietly refined engagement solutions without emitting a single detectable signal. Had this been a combat scenario, the engagement would have already reached its terminal phase. This capability came from the F-35's distributed Aperture system, a network of infrared sensors embedded around the aircraft that continuously observes the surrounding environment. Data from all sensors is fused into a single spherical image presented directly to the pilot. Targets are visible below the aircraft, behind it, to either side. The airframe effectively disappears from the pilot's perception, replaced by a continuous awareness of the battle space. Against aircraft like the Tu-95, the system operates under ideal conditions. Each bomber is powered by 4 NK-12 turboprop engines, the most powerful of their type ever built. Each engine generates roughly 15,000 shaft horsepower, driving large contra-rotating propellers whose blade tips exceed the speed of sound. That level of power produces heat. On infrared sensors, each engine registers hundreds of degrees above ambient temperature. Against a background approaching minus 30 degrees Celsius, the contrast is extreme. Even minor throttle adjustments produce measurable thermal changes. The bombers were not difficult to track. They were unmistakable. As the intercept stabilized, the 2 F-35s separated into a deliberate combat spread. Roughly 2 kilometers of lateral separation was maintained. One aircraft held position near 30,000 feet, while the second offset slightly higher and to the south. This geometry was not arbitrary. Each aircraft viewed the formation from a different angle. Sensor data was exchanged through a directional, low probability of intercept data link that Russian receivers could not detect. What each pilot saw was not a single sensor picture, but a fused composite built from multiple perspectives. 12 sensor feeds, one unified track. The escort fighters began to show signs of unease. Pilots periodically checked their rear hemisphere, a habit ingrained through decades of training. Radar scopes remained clear. Threat warning systems remained quiet. But experience suggested something was wrong. Soviet-era doctrine assumed threats would emerge from the forward sector. Escort formations were oriented accordingly, screening the approach axis ahead of the bombers. No attention was paid to the space behind them. That was where the F-35s remained. Had the escorts attempted to engage, the fighters could have transitioned into beam geometry, flying perpendicular to radar line of sight. Pulse Doppler radars rely on relative velocity to discriminate targets from background clutter, reduce closure rate towards zero, and the target blends into noise. One aircraft disappears, another appears behind you. Fire control systems aboard the F-35s continuously evaluated missile solutions regardless. Engagement envelopes were calculated, refined, and updated in real time. The Norwegian pilots chose restraint. At 0911, one F-35 briefly activated its radar for 2 seconds. Inside the Russian cockpits, the atmosphere changed immediately. Threat receivers triggered, warning tones sounded. Indicators lit across multiple displays. The unmistakable signature of a targeting radar filled the cabin, and then it vanished. Radar contacts disappeared. Warnings ceased. The sky returned to apparent emptiness. 2 seconds had been sufficient. Unlike mechanically scanned radars that require seconds to sweep a volume of airspace, the F-35's active electronically scanned array redirects energy electronically. Beam direction changes occur in microseconds. Hundreds of transmit-receive modules concentrate energy on a precise point, extract high-resolution data, then cease transmission before the source can be localized. Those 2 seconds yielded targeting-grade information on every aircraft in the formation. The escort fighters reacted instinctively. Hard turns toward the perceived threat axis. Radar power increased. Electronic countermeasure pods activated. Mechanical radar dishes swept left and right, searching for a signal that no longer existed. Nothing appeared. The reason is physical, not procedural. The F-35's radar cross-section is measured in thousandths of a square meter. Its airframe geometry deflects radar energy away from the source. Surface treatments absorb remaining returns. Engine compressor faces are hidden behind curved inlets. Russian fighter radars were designed to detect large surface vessels and conventional aircraft. Asking them to detect an F-35 at range is equivalent to searching for a golf ball against open ocean. Jamming systems activated anyway, broadcasting energy into empty space. Power was expended countering threats that were no longer transmitting. Meanwhile, the F-35s continued to collect. Every emission, every frequency, every reaction time, all recorded by onboard electronic warfare systems. The Russians were not defending themselves effectively. They were revealing how they defended themselves. The bomber formation continued its patrol. No weapons were launched, no further radar spikes occurred, but inside the cockpits, attention shifted. Crews scanned displays more frequently. Instruments were checked and rechecked. Sensors indicated nothing. Instinct suggested otherwise. At 0914, visual confirmation arrived. One F-35 slid into position approximately 500 meters off the lead bomber's wing, close enough to observe crew positions through cockpit windows, close enough to identify weapons mounted beneath the fuselage. No radar warning preceded the sighting. The aircraft simply appeared. The escort fighters could see the F-35s visually, yet still could not achieve radar lock. Even at close range, radar returns were weaker than small birds several kilometers away. The Norwegian flight lead transmitted once on the International Guard frequency, issuing a standard warning regarding proximity to NATO airspace. No reply followed. Responding would have acknowledged detection failure. Silence preserved ambiguity. For hours, the F-35s remained with the formation, cycling through observation geometries, beam aspect, quartering aspect, directly astern. Each position captured different radar and infrared signatures. Each maneuver refined tracking models. Data streamed continuously through Link 16 to ground stations across multiple countries. Analysts observed the encounter as it unfolded, drafting assessments before the patrol reached its turnaround point. The bomber crews were aware they were being observed. They were not aware of how much was being extracted. Every radar mode, every thermal profile, every emission pattern was recorded. Engagement libraries were updated in real time. The most valuable data arrived unexpectedly. In their attempts to locate the F-35s, escort radars cycled through an unfamiliar frequency hopping mode. It was not part of standard configurations. It represented a newer electronic warfare capability. One patrol had just exposed it. The Norwegian flight lead increased pressure subtly, activating low probability of intercept radar modes that altered frequency and waveform characteristics continuously. To Russian threat receivers, it appeared as multiple radars operating simultaneously from different directions. Warning systems saturated, jamming systems escalated. That response was logged as well. Eventually, both F-35s ceased all active emissions. Radars off, radios silent, identification systems disabled. The aircraft became passive observers once again. Without external reference points, Russian defensive systems began to conflict. Threat receivers misclassified friendly emissions. Radar locks briefly settled on wingmen before being manually broken. For several seconds, the formation's electronic defenses worked against themselves. Nothing was fired. Everything was recorded. At 13:53, the bomber formation turned for home. NATO fighters did not disengage immediately. Additional aircraft joined from neighboring airspace, maintaining presence without escalation. The message was procedural, not performative. The escort continued until the Russian aircraft reached their airspace boundary. NATO fighters peeled away in sequence and returned to base. The patrol ended without incident, but the encounter did not. It entered databases, simulations, and planning documents. It became a reference case for future operations. Because the next time such aircraft meet, observation may not be the objective. Tap to watch for more.